Beste DenkTank-luisteraar, welkom bij deze speciale editie van DenkTank, de podcast. We zijn vandaag op Amsterdam Business Forum in Avals Live en we gaan in gesprek met de sprekers net nadat ze van het podium zijn gekomen. Ik ben Hans Jansen, ik ben vandaag niet de host, want ik ren de hele dag rond op het seminar. De hosting van deze editie van DenkTank, de podcast, is in handen van Christ Kolen en zijn speciale sidekick Carlijn Loertie. Veel plezier bij DenkTank, de podcast vanaf Amsterdam Business Forum.
All unread, and it was black, oops, and lost almost half of what I had budgeted in like the first 3 months. And that forced me to learn how to structure advising agreements so that I wouldn't have to invest. And ultimately, that mistake ended up producing some of the best outcomes.
Helping leaders and professionals of the Netherlands and beyond to become even better at their work. That's the goal of DenkTank, the podcast of DenkProducties. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Christ Kolen, host of the show, and I'm here together with co-host Carlijn Loertie. We are recording from Amsterdam Business Forum, the biggest leadership conference of the Netherlands. We have a very special guest in the show. He has been listed as one of Fast Company's most innovative business people. He is an early-stage tech investor and advisor of companies like Uber, Facebook, Shopify, Duolingo, and about 100 others. He is the author of 5 #1 New York Times and Wall Street Journal bestsellers. His podcast has hundreds of millions listeners worldwide. And he is an absolute expert in optimizing productivity and human performance. Of course, I'm talking about the one and only Tim Ferriss. Tim, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. Yeah. It's all downhill after the intro.
No. I have the first question for you. And I was thinking, you do not do a lot of speaking engagement, but today you are at a leadership seminar in Amsterdam. How do you select which invites you do accept?
These days, it's dependent on places I would like to visit, friends I would like to see, and organizations that I think will do a good job of facilitating fireside chats, conversations, as opposed to a keynote that I repeat. I just find that to be stultifying and not terribly fun personally. So I enjoy the interactive element, and I enjoy better getting to know different countries, different cities, different cultures. So that's why I am here. Big fan of the Netherlands and Amsterdam.
Okay,
we have a question about that later on.
Okay.
But what did you talk about today on stage?
Well, it was I guess a form of improv jazz in the sense that it was dependent on the questions I got. A lot of them were leadership focused. Many of them were startup focused. Some were related to burnout or mental health, work-life balance, things along these lines. So it was a pretty broad spectrum.
Yeah, we heard that. And we want to talk about a little bit about your experiences. Can you share a pivotal moment of experience that led you to the transition of being entrepreneur and angel investor for becoming a prominent author and podcaster in self-help and personal development space?
Sure. Let's see. I can start with the podcast. Actually, there are some similarities. So I became an entrepreneur after the startup that I was working for in 2000 imploded and my entire division got fired. And so, never to let a good crisis go to waste, decided that I wanted to take a shot at entrepreneurship because the US is perhaps strange in this way, but I had my healthcare actually paid for a period of time. Imagine that. And I knew that I had a grace period of perhaps 3 to 6 months where I could attempt something with very low risk because everyone was being fired. Many companies were going out of business. There was bad news everywhere. So it was basically a free ticket to attempt entrepreneurship. That's how that started. And then on the podcast side, after my 3rd book, I was completely burned out. So I was a 4-hour chef. It was a very difficult project. It probably should have taken 3 to 4 years. I did it in a year and a half. Very proud of it, but it took a severe physical toll. And every time I launch a book, which has been a while, but every time I launch a book, I look for and I ask friends who are authors who have had books come out recently, what channel or what type of medium is undervalued currently that really delivers a lot of, say, in this case, book sales. And they said, well, there are these things called podcasts. And I knew about podcasts, but they were very nascent. I mean, this was a very early stage.
This was 10 years ago.
This was 10, I guess, probably 11 or 12 years ago.
Oh, wow.
Almost 12 years ago when the book came out. And I enjoyed my time as a guest on podcasts so much, these longer form podcasts, that I decided to take a break from writing books and experiment with this thing called podcasts and to do 6 episodes. And that's how the podcast started. It was very lightweight. And then the angel investing side, best decision I made there, and the reason I think I started, well, the best decision I made was being born at the right time so that I would land in Silicon Valley, starting angel investing in 2009, because it was a very, very good time to be investing in general. But I would say, secondly, instead of going to business school, which had been my dream to go to Stanford Business School, I decided, rather than to do that, to take what I would have spent, because I would have had to pay for it. So let's call it $60,000 a year, not cheap. I'm sure it's more now. And to basically treat that as my first investment fund, not technically, but in my own head as a fund, but to label that my personal MBA. And so to invest in companies with the objective of learning skills and getting to know people, to develop relationships, assuming that all of it would go to zero, in the same way that tuition might go to zero. And that is what launched my ability and track record, I suppose, in angel investing.
So on the one hand, the start of the entrepreneurship was really risk-free. And on the other hand, your angel investing was high risk.
It was risky in the same way that going to business school would be risky, in a sense. Although there were some critical differences, right? So the guaranteed upside, if you can go to a place like Stanford Business School, is you get this stamp that is very recognizable worldwide, like Harvard Business School, same thing. The downside is that you come out in debt generally, or you've spent $120,000, and then you have to start making money. So the risks are different, but the risks exist. In the case of the startup investing, okay, it's the same amount of money. I'm not going to get this stamp of approval, but I will have the potential of making money if I'm really lucky, and perhaps if I have some degree of competence. And I made some terrible decisions in the beginning. Terrible.
Best learning moments.
I lost because I got so excited in the beginning, and I had made all these plans to use these small investments and to make it last for 2 years. And then I spent way too much, way too early, and it immediately went to zero.
All on red.
Oh, yeah, all on red. And it was black. Oops. And lost almost half of what I had budgeted in like the first 3 months. And I was like, oh, shit, this is going to be a problem. And that forced me to learn how to structure advising agreements so that I wouldn't have to invest. And ultimately, that mistake ended up producing some of the best outcomes. That's how I ended up advising some companies where it would have been impossible to invest.
Can I take one step back to the podcast? Because you mentioned on the full stage that maybe there's dark times ahead in the podcast. Why do you think that?
Well, I think that at least in the US, maybe this is true other places, because of the uncertainty around macroeconomic factors and increasing interest rates, for instance, the cost of debt has gone up substantially. So if you have companies that are either leveraged as publicly traded companies or as private companies, if they've raised a lot of equity financing and they realize, we're in a bad position. Our valuation is very high. We're probably not going to get the same valuation if we go out to raise money from the equity markets. And we don't want to have a huge down round because that'll affect our employees and our personal stakes as executives or founders. They look at the alternative, which is debt, but it's going to be very, very expensive. And they look for ways to cut costs. And one of the ways to cut costs is to cut advertising. Most podcasts rely on advertising. So I've seen, and most people who are honest about this have seen a lot of pullback on advertising. I think that is likely to continue to be the case. We'll see. And secondly, if you look at the reported numbers of podcast growth, you see this graph that is up and to the right. So it looks very good, but statistics can be deceiving, and graphs especially can be deceiving. And if you really dig into the data, what you realize is that the growth in podcast listenership, I do think there is sort of a secular tailwind in the sense that more people are consuming audio as a secondary activity. I think this is a trend that will continue to develop. But when you look at the way that companies have grown the podcasting market, the way they've done it is not by necessarily producing great shows and building audiences around those great shows. It's by producing a lot of shows. So they produce 50 shows and 48 of them fail, but they try to sell advertising across it as a network. And that model, by and large, has not worked. And so I think there are going to be multiple structural and financial problems coming into podcasting, but that isn't necessarily a bad thing. It just means, like a herd of wildebeest going across Africa in a migration, it's like the weak are going to get called out. Podcasts are not disappearing. It's an excellent form and format of media, although I also think it's going to get challenging for a lot of people because the platforms, meaning whether it's YouTube or the social platforms like Instagram and so on, obviously TikTok, are changing their algorithms to reward video. So most podcasters right now who want to compete, there are exceptions, and say true crime and so on, are being forced to become television producers if they really want to benefit from the sorting of the algorithms. And that is more cost, more fixed overhead, and for me, sort of antithetical to why I started doing podcasts. I like lean, mean, mobile audio operations. That's my preference, but maybe I'm a dinosaur. We'll see how it turns out.
We have in the Netherlands a paid platform for podcast makers. So when you want quality, you go to that platform and just pay on monthly basis. So the quality will also will always survive in this world. Back to you, Tim. I have a question back to today. In what way do you want to make the world a better place? It's a bit high over, but are you working on something? Are you working on big issues?
Yeah, I would say there are a few things that come to mind. I have had a private foundation, nonprofit foundation since 2015. It might have actually technically been started a little bit later, that focuses on mental health therapeutics. So funding early stage science related to treatments of difficult to treat conditions like treatment-resistant depression, complex PTSD, OCD, anorexia nervosa, these psychiatric disorders that by and large do not have effective treatments. But there are certain early-stage scientific bets that I find very interesting and compelling. And as someone who has a family that has suffered from addiction with opiates and alcohol, fatalities, also different types of depression and schizophrenia. So I really won the lottery with a motley assortment of family issues. But I've seen that. I felt all of those quite personally. And many of these deaths of despair, whether it's overdose or suicide because of complete hopelessness, I find cross socioeconomic boundaries. They do not discriminate in terms of race or socioeconomic class or anything like that. These are global issues. So the foundation has really focused on the alleviation of suffering by trying to create better tools. And that's taken multiple forms. I've been very engaged since 2015 publicly in the scientific community that is examining, say, psychedelic-assisted therapies for many of the conditions that I named. There are other modalities that I find very interesting, different types of brain stimulation like TMS, and some of the more recent experiments coming out of places like Stanford University. So I would say the first thing that comes to mind is the work that the foundation is doing.
Wow, that's beautiful intrinsic drivers to help, and thank you for sharing that.
Absolutely,
I'm looking at Chris, and I'm looking at the time. Oh, it's going so fast.
One last personal question: you are now in Amsterdam.
Yes.
Why do you like the city, and what are you going to do? And for context, we're going to air this just in a few weeks. So if you say tomorrow morning, I'll go to, nobody's going to show up. Can you tell us a bit about your plan?
Well, I would say that Amsterdam has always struck me as a very international diverse, culturally diverse city. And I grew up on Long Island. I've spent a lot of time in New York City, and so it's to me, it shares some similarities with New York City in the sense that there are many languages, people from many countries who have emigrated here, including a lot of friends of mine from the United States, and I always enjoy my time here. It's very simple. I find people generally friendly, certainly friendlier than New Yorkers, which is not hard, to be honest. But it's become an interesting hub, and I wanted to spend time here just to walk the streets, go for bike rides, go for a boat ride, see what I see, go to some theaters, art exhibits, just to see what I pick up, if anything. In the same way that I find Portugal very interesting. It's also become a new hub for a lot of reasons. And Amsterdam would be on a short list for me of places that I'm currently very interested in with respect to Western Europe specifically.
Always welcome if you want to move here.
Oh, dank je wel.
He knows Dutch.
So now we're going to switch to the talk on the main stage that Tim Ferriss just did. And the first talk is about batch processing, and how does Tim do this in his own practice?
I would say also, for me, batch processing and organizing similar tasks in certain days of the week is very helpful. And I've seen Jack Dorsey do this. I've seen a number of different people do this. It's something that once you start looking for, you begin to notice in a lot of high performers.
Are you batching your own work week?
Yeah, so I'll give you an example. I record the podcast Tuesdays and Fridays. It's either 10 a.m. or 3 p.m. In my time zone. Then Tuesdays are basically team calls and one-on-ones. So I batch my phone calls and review of, say, documents and FYIs and updates and so on from employees on Tuesdays. So those are not scattered throughout the week.
Right.
Still available if need be for emergencies, but my general perspective is that if anything needs to be turned around in 48 hours or less, and you need to scramble to do that, then you have a broken system. So you should fix the system, right? So if we have wires that are going out for, say, accounts payable, those are done on a Tuesday, and everybody has been trained to understand it's on a Tuesday. There are very rare exceptions where there is truly an emergency that needs to be expedited. But if you find yourself handling certain types of tasks with very fast turnaround where you need to put down what you should be focusing on, then it's a broken system. So you need to fix the system or the process or set policies. Same. So those would be a few things that I find very helpful. This is going to sound like old news, but quarterly offsites, also very helpful if you have the proper facilitator and can structure them well for focusing on the big picture. And I would say you as the leader also don't need to be the only one accountable for keeping everyone on task. Like, everyone is responsible for that.
This was Tim Ferriss on batch processing, and we'll now switch to another fragment, and it's about making unpopular decisions. Why is it important and how do you do it? Tim Ferriss, live from Amsterdam Business Forum.
Being a leader is hard and uncomfortable, and if you're doing it right. By and large. And that there, I think, has become, there has come to pass a trend. At least I see this in the US. I'm not sure if it's true in Amsterdam, but where leaders want to be liked. And so there's a weakness that masquerades as strength, where they say, we want this to be democratic. We want everyone to have equal say. And they absolve themselves of the responsibility of making those unpopular decisions. Right? They want to be shielded from the issues of making, by the way, those unpopular decisions might be the wrong decisions.
So it looks like a virtuous decision, like, here I am, I'm being democratic.
Yeah, but it's weakness masquerading as strength. Yeah, I think often. And that, in fact, I think you asked unpopular, or you asked unconventional, so I'm giving you that, which is, I don't think most humans want everyone to have an equal say. There's like humans, primates, if you look at our evolutionary past, like, function pretty well in a well-defined hierarchy. The key seems to be that roles and responsibilities are really well-defined. Mm-hmm. and then it can work really well. But the companies certainly that I've been involved with as an angel investor or advisor that have done best over time have very strong leaders, and they certainly listen to the counsel of close collaborators and, say, a board of directors, and in certain instances, boards can fire CEOs, right? But the CEOs are actually the strongest ones I've seen are willing to risk getting fired for what they believe. They're like, yeah, sure, fire me. Like, what's your best alternative? But I think this is the best decision for these following reasons. And I greatly admire those people. There are, I'm sure, exceptions to what I'm describing, but if you're asking across 700 interviews and 100 plus angel investments, I'd say what I just described.
This was Tim Ferriss live from Amsterdam Business Forum. I hope you enjoyed this talk. If you did, please subscribe to DenkTank, the podcast, and we'll hope you listen next time again. Thank you very much.